Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of the Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Austin Conrad, co-owner of Virginia Trophy Guides. Austin and I take a deep dive into Virginia smallmouth and musky, and Austin even shares the legend of Skippy Britches. I think you're really going to enjoy this one. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And a shout out to our sponsor, Trout Routes. It's a fact none of us get to fish as much as we want. Almost overnight, planning a fishing trip went from a gazetteer and word of mouth to the entire internet. There have never been more resources available for fishing, but it's a challenge trying to wade through the digital noise to find the most current and relevant information. Spend less time surfing the internet and more time on the water with Trout Routes. With over 350,000 access points mapped across 50,000 trout streams and much more, Trout Routes has all the data you need to help you make the most of your time on the water. Where I fish in southern Appalachia, figuring out how to get off the water can be as important as finding it in the first place. With Trout Routes, I can mark the best spots to get out of the water so I don't find myself in a valley I can't climb out of as the sun goes down. Up your game and download the app today. Use code ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, for 20% off your Trout Routes Pro membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Now, on to our interview. Well, Austin, welcome to the Articulate Fly.
Thanks, Marvin. Appreciate you having me. Thrilled to be here.
Yeah, looking forward to it. And we have a tradition on the Articulate Fly. We like to ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
I thought about this one because I know you asked everybody. And I can't decide if it was whether I was fishing with my grandfather and my little brother on a lake, like a pay-to-play lake in southern West Virginia called Plum Orchard Lake. And I can't remember if it was that one and him being frustrated all day, untangling and us, snagging up on trees behind us, or if it was, another early one with him and his buddy Joey. They had a fish camp on the Greenbrier River, and we would go there and fish all the time. And we did kind of like an old school John boat float with a trolling motor and a prop outboard. And by the end of the day, the only thing that worked was the trolling motor. So going down some interesting water, pretty much not under power most of the time. So that was a fun one, made for a long day, taking off in the dark, hitting a bunch of stuff, but catching smallmouth bass. I would say those are the two. I couldn't figure out which one was earlier. I even made a call to try to figure out which one was. And but yeah, I mean, growing up fishing in southern West Virginia for bass and trout and stuff, and got a pretty early start. So I was fortunate in that way. It helped foster my love for fishing in the outdoors.
Very, very neat. So when did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
So that actually was not until I was an adult. So on the other side of my family, I had an Uncle Joe. He wasn't actually an uncle, but a good close friend, him and his wife Sandy with my mom's parents. And Joe Lewis was probably one of the only guys fishing in also the Greenbrier and the lower New River there in West Virginia on a fly rod. And he would wade around and fish for that, and I'd watch him. And he never let me fly fish because he said it was too complicated. But I'd seen it, but I'd always been told by my grandfather that it was, he did that for trout. And so I went to college at Penn State, and when I was like an adult, that's when I kind of started picking up the fly rod right before I went to school. And then more seriously, when I got to school and worked for a shop up there called TCO Fly Shop, and kind of got more and more serious in my tenure there as an employee.
Very neat. How did you not get drummed out of the core of your family if not for not being a mountaineer and you went to Penn State?
I know. Yeah, it was I was told that at least it wasn't Pitt or Virginia Tech. So, I mean, that was a tough one to that was a tough call to my mom's father, who was a Mountaineer student 2 times over. So that was definitely an awkward moment, but yeah, I went to Penn State and it wanted to get out of the area. That was the big thing. My brother, ended up going to WVU, and so I kind of wanted to do my own thing, and yeah, I'm glad I did. Met some really great people and got to fish some really pretty water that I may have not otherwise, so.
Yeah, the fishing around State College. I mean, I've been up there a few times to fish with the guys in the shop, and I mean, I think I could kind of be ruined. I mean, there's so much good water that's so easy to get to.
Yeah, that was kind of eye opening. So in Southern West Virginia, we had a lot of good trout water. Definitely did, for sure. Still do. But when you get to a place like State College, you like realize, like, you're like, wow, like I didn't know what great trout fishing was. I mean, you can't spit without hitting a trout stream. And so that was kind of eye opening, and it was great. I mean, it was probably to the detriment of my grades, because every day you could go fish somewhere new and not hit the same water twice within a 150-mile radius. So
yeah, that's even before you throw in bow hunting for deer, right?
Yeah, I didn't do too much of that up there. I didn't do any hunting while I was there. I wish I had, but yeah, I mean, I had so much on my plate, and just having the fishing, I was kind of had a wealth of riches with that. So it was nice. But yeah, I mean, I always tell people, I mean, Central PA in particular is kind of a outdoorsman's paradise. We're kind of very lucky in the mid-Atlantic as a whole that we, between angling opportunities and hunting opportunities, we've got some of the best in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, Austin, tell me a few of the people that have kind of mentored you on your fly fishing journey, and, what did they teach you?
Yeah. So, I kind of, like, I guess I would break that question down like a couple ways, where it's, I got my start working at TCO, and, worked for George Costa, who you have on the show, for the reports and everything. And George was, kind of getting me a job up there, which was pretty much I looked at it as it was a discount and, beer money, and helped me pay rent a little bit. And it kind of gave me a start. And so George, I was kind of green as far as fly fishing went when I was up there, to be honest. And so George, kind of, whether he would say it or not, I'm a big believer in, kind of just shutting up and listening sometimes, especially when people know more than you do. So he may not tell you that. He may squirm, and there may be some other people that would squirm to call him a mentor. But George definitely was probably the earliest one. And then other guys up there that I would just sit and listen to, because it just seemed to me like they were trout gurus, like, Sam Galt, Shane Adams, things like that. I don't think I would call them mentors, but I've been fortunate to know some really, really fishy people in a short time in this industry. And then as I, got back to this area, Virginia and West Virginia, Josh Laferty, who I work with, another guy that would probably squirm, but I would call him a mentor. As far as, he doesn't, I don't think he cares for that kind of notoriety or whatnot, but yeah, Josh, I mean, he taught me everything I know about, musky fishing on the fly. And then in recent years, or last couple of years, getting to know Blaine, same thing. I mean, it's just one of those guys you just kind of shut up and listen. And there's always tidbits you can learn, talking to, whether it be somebody you consider a mentor or a friend and colleague, whatever. And just like that too. I mean, like I said, I've been fortunate to be around some of the fishiest people, I think, in this industry. I mean, kid that works with us, Braden Miller, I learned, just talking to him, he's such a nerd about fishing that you pick up something all the time, and he's so technical and so sound in everything he does. And Brendan Rooch, in PA, worked with him closely and good friend. And I mean, a great bass angler guide, and, guys like Josh Trammell in Ohio and some of the Michigan boys, like, I just try to pick up what I can, whether it's something I would consider a mentor or not. But, it's, I would say George Costa and Josh just giving me an opportunity in both of those places. And then Jim Johnson in Alaska, I worked up there for a few seasons. And even though that was totally different to what I do here now, Jim taught me a lot about professionalism and being a guide and, getting up and getting after it every day. I mean, he's like he's an I don't take no for an answer type guy, where it's like you go out there and you get after it, and so Jim, George and Josh, I would say, have been super important to me, and I can't thank those guys enough for helping me along the way and really get my start and push it along. So.
Yeah, very neat. So you're a kid at Penn State. You're working for George, and you were just kind of figuring out the fly fishing thing. When did you get the guide bug?
Yeah, so it kind of happened as I was like leaving Penn State, and and I left the shop, and it was weird. It actually kind of happened like the same time that I got an offer to work on the fly fishing film tour. And so in the midst of that, I was helping a guy named Paul Nicoletti, good friend of mine, with the fly fishing film tour. And then coming back to Virginia to after school. And, it's kind of light, like not doing a ton of guide work, not, some trips here and there. And I just decided, after school, I was like, didn't really know what I wanted to do. I thought I did, and just kind of ran with it. And so, I just kind of dove, head first into the industry, so to say. But between the film tour and just guiding as soon as I got back, and it just seemed like it just all happened really quickly because, I was doing trips here, and then it was like, boom, I got the job in Alaska. Went and left, did my first season in Alaska. I got to spend a lot of time with Josh. And, I had told him that I had interest in being in that area and guiding for bass and musky. And, I was kind of nervous about that conversation, and Josh was nothing but welcoming. I mean, he was like, hey man, screw it. Like, we'll just do it together, and was very fortunate with that, I was kind of nervous about the whole thing. And, he kind of squashed all that and gave me the confidence to go full steam ahead. So that it kind of happened really quickly, but right after school, I would say.
Interesting. And so did you just kind of start, guiding for yourself before it all came together, or were you working with a shop or an outfitter?
Yeah. So it was like, just like I said, like a pretty small amount of trips. And I was actually just doing trout, in Virginia. And this was a very short time before, I kind of met Josh, and we kind of started Virginia Trophy Guides. But yeah, it was just doing some walk and wade trout trips. And to be honest with you, when I was doing it, I think that I love trout. I really do. But I wasn't really inspired to guide for them long term. And I knew I wanted to do something slightly different. But I didn't really want to leave the region. I've been all over the country. I've got in Alaska, and I think people probably don't believe me when I say it, but I wouldn't rather be anywhere else than, this area, Western Virginia. And obviously I'm partial to West Virginia too, but this, I love being in this region. As far as fishing, I don't think you can beat it, and the views as well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty amazing thing. I mean, if you kind of go from, let's just say, North Carolina kind of up to Maryland, I mean, the species diversity that you have and how quickly you can kind of change things up, there are just not a lot of other places in the country that kind of have that diversity of species to chase.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, I grew up fishing for bass and particularly on the New River and the Greenbrier. But within reach, you've got trout. And then once you get to Virginia here, it's, you can go to the coast. And I mean, the Chesapeake Bay is probably one of the best saltwater fisheries in the world, right? So, I mean, there's so many opportunities from, in a 5 hour drive. I think, I always hype up Pennsylvania and West Virginia, and I try to drive people to those places and just to see them. I think everybody should and go fish them. And I feel the same way about here in Western Virginia, and I feel the same way about the Chesapeake. Even though I don't work out there, I haven't done a ton of serious fishing out there, but I think Virginia is unique in that way where you can drive 5 hours to the mountains, fish for brook trout, wild browns, wild rainbows, smallmouth, musky, catfish, whatever you want. And then you can get out to the coast and fish for some of the best bull drum, cobia, and so on. So I think that's a really unique and special thing.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know you mentioned a bunch of folks already, but are there any other folks that have, mentored you on your guide journey that you want to mention and, let folks know kind of what they taught you?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I mean, if I was to break it down into those three fixtures and in that journey, I've been really fortunate to, maybe it was time and place and right time, right place. But, going from working in PA and being surrounded by those guys up there, I mean, there was plenty of guys up there I didn't even get a chance to mention, Brian Wolfkill and another close friend of mine, Elliot Hall, who is, yeah, sneakily one of the most fishy people I know. I mean, I've thrown him in smallmouth and musky scenarios where, he didn't grow up fishing for that kind of stuff. And he's just, we've taken him fishing for brown trout on tailwaters and had the best day I've ever seen on a Virginia tailwater with him. Some people, like I said, I mean, I think some people like Josh would shudder to hear me mention to call him a mentor just because he doesn't care about it. But like I said, I try to, all the friends I surround myself with, I try to, learn something from them because you can, and there's things that, I talk to Brendan all the time, and there's things that are happening on his rivers that I can apply to my own, even though they can be different. And I think they're really, like I said, going from George to, working for Jim and working with Josh. I mean, I've been really fortunate. And then getting to know Blaine, like I said, I mean, that's, we shoot the breeze and just chat a lot too. But I try to drive him crazy and pick his brain all the time, get off rivers that he's guided for 30 years after a day. And, whether I had a good day or a tough day, and just run through it with him and see if there was something I could have done better, and I'm a firm believer in iron sharpens iron. So just getting to know guys like that and learning from them, that's a big thing for me,
Yeah, it's super neat. And, I have a couple questions I always like to ask guides. And one of them, Austin, is, to get your thoughts on what you think the secret is to being a good fishing guide.
I also have a background from when I was in college and a little bit beyond in bartending. And so the service industry. And so at the end of the day, as hard as we fish and, despite the fact that we may be after a certain type of fish or a certain type of way, it's still the service industry. And, we aim, when Josh brought me on, I mean, it was all about showing people a good time, right? I mean, there's certain conditional factors where days are not going to be as good as you had hoped. And being able to fill the gaps and, show people a good time, regardless of conditions, I think that's huge. And giving somebody an opportunity to share a boat with somebody that they enjoy it, because I mean, I think it was that Flip Pallet said, a boat can fill as, big or small as you want it to, and then I'm sure there's experiences where people I've had fishing experiences with people where, not guiding or not paying for a guided trip, but being on a boat with somebody and that boat feels really small, and so trying to be a well-rounded person and, um, and, and provide a good experience in that way beyond just the fishing. Cause I mean, there's certain things we can control in fishing. There's certain things we absolutely can't. And so if people can learn and leave with something that they didn't know before the start of the day, that's big for me. Obviously personal bests or first smallmouth or first musky, those things are all great. But if somebody left and they're driving home and they're like, wow, it like clicked with me when, Austin said, slow this down, or you're dropping this shoulder, or whatever, that they can be like, oh, it just clicked, and now I could take that to Louisiana, or I can take that to, the Bahamas or wherever with them, and can make their fishing experience better, over time. That's a win for me. So.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because I always tell people, kind of having been around the sport for a fair amount of time, kind of, as I would say, on the other end of the rod, to, encourage people to be really honest with their guides about what they want to accomplish during a day, and, not make you be a mind reader and an awesome fishing guide.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely encourage that too. And I kind of have that there's sometimes the awkward conversation at the beginning of the day where it's like, what are you looking to gain out of this trip? And a lot of times it's even before we get on the boat. And we're very fortunate to have a lot of serious anglers, whether it be in the smallmouth or musky pursuit, people that have experience. But we certainly, especially with smallmouth, get a lot of brand new anglers, and their goal may not be the same as a guy that I spent 2 days with in April chasing his personal best smallmouth. Their goals may not be the same, and so being able to read a room and understand people's expectations, and then helping them achieve those expectations and those goals. So that's a big part of guiding. It's not just big fish and, telling people where to cast and rowing down the river. It's providing a well-rounded experience for somebody, and then being able to adapt to what their needs are. So definitely, we get that kind of greener side, and, that's a completely different day sometimes. And sometimes it works out that they end up catching, great bass or tons of bass. And some days it's like, they're brand new and learning, and they're grinding it out for a dozen, 15 fish. And to them, sometimes I struggle to remember, that I'll get off the water and talk to Josh or talk to Abby, and on the way home, and I'm like, it was a little tougher than I thought. And, especially Abby, she's always like, well, look, I mean, how many bass is that those folks caught before? And I'm like, well, they said they've gone out a few times and never caught anything. They're like, she's like, well, you just said that they caught more bass than they ever have, and they caught the biggest bass they ever have. And so it's all about perspective and providing, that kind of realistic experience for people.
Yeah, it's funny because I always tell people that, you can't control the catching, right? So, all you can really, hope for at the end of the day is that everything that was humanly possible to put you on fish was done, right?
Absolutely. And that's like, when Josh kind of brought me on, and when we brought Braden on, it's all been the same conversation, which is like, we fish hard. We don't fish by the clock, and we go out, and at the very least, all he expected and all I expect is that, we fish, guide hard all day, and give it everything you have. I know it sounds cliche, but as long as you're doing everything you can on your end, there's some things, like I said, you can't control, but for the most part, if we're working hard and they're working hard, good things happen. I mean, I'm a firm believer in a good attitude and good river karma too. So
Yeah, you got to grind to shine, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And another question I always have to ask guides is to share their biggest misconception that they think folks have about the life of a fishing guide.
Oh, where to begin? Um, yeah, I would say the biggest misconception is that it's that you're fishing every day, and that it's a glamorous uh lifestyle. It's like that it's easy, and then it's glamorous, and that's something that two things that it's definitely not. Our days often start. I can just speak to myself, but my days often start at 4:30, 5 a.m. And I'm not going to bed until sometimes midnight or beyond. And it's just constant work. And sometimes you're struggling to find, you've got something that went wrong with your truck, and you're on a skid of guide days, and you can't just drop it and fix your truck, or you're working on your truck at midnight. I've also done that. And that everything's just kind of peachy. It's, I love it. I wouldn't do anything else. I truly mean that. But it's definitely it's a tougher lifestyle and career choice than people give credit for. You're away from home a lot, whether you're working right down the street or, you're working seasons in Alaska or Patagonia, New Zealand, whatever. And it's tough on your schedule with loved ones and family, and you got to have supportive people around you. That's for sure. Because it's a demanding job, and it can be inconsistent. I don't care what anybody says. I mean, there's times, I lost a lot of business in October, because of Helene, and that can be a tough thing to swallow. I mean, luckily I had a large majority of those people reschedule, but when you're counting on that money and everything can be seasonal, luckily we have a year-round fishery. But when you're counting on that money, and I know there's guys who had it a lot harder than me. I'm not saying that, by any means, but, because all I did was lose some business. But yeah, it's one of those things where I think people think that, you just start guiding and it's like, boom, your schedule's filled, people just, your phone's ringing off the hook. It definitely takes a lot of hard work. It's a lot of hours in a day, and it's a lot of time, away sometimes from people, loved ones and family, and friends. So I would say that's the biggest misconception.
Yeah, and I think too that a lot of people don't really kind of appreciate that kind of pre-work and post-work every day. And then also too, like, I talked to Blaine about it, and it's like, just the grind during musky season, it's cold, right? Every morning.
Oh God.
Right.
Yeah.
And I mean,
yeah.
And when that sun drops behind the mountains in the afternoon, it gets chilly, right? And you get off and you've been cold all day, and you start doing that. If you're fishing with Blaine, maybe you fish with him 1 day, 2 days, maybe 3 days, but he's doing that like 14 days in a row, 20 days in a row. Right.
Yeah.
Or you flip it around, like, topwater fishing for smallmouth, it's not cool in Virginia in August.
In July.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And so, as I always say, the fish are in the shade and you're not.
Yeah, it's exactly what you said. I mean, we've got a year-round fishery, but we have polar like extremes in weather. I don't think people consider how cold musky days can be. And, granted, there's probably some guys in Michigan that would laugh at that. But, because we don't have it that cold. But yeah, it's definitely what you said. And I think we feel it the most during musky season, because you've done it before. You've musky fished with Blaine, and it can be a grind. And when you're doing it almost every day for, from December through the end of February, by the end of it, sometimes I'm begging for pre-spawn bass days, because those days, they feel short, they feel cold, you're working hard, clients are working hard, and it's still the same thing. You're getting home later, not quite as late as you do with summer day or a spring bass day, but you're getting home late, And then you've got a lot to do, to get prepared for the next day, whether it's the same clients or different set of clients. So yeah, I mean, it's definitely a grind, but I do love it. I think I thrive in those kind of scenarios, like that kind of controlled chaos is where I do my best work. So.
Oh, well, there you go. Well, I want to get a little bit more detail on kind of, the background story, the creation story for Virginia Trophy Guides. Tell us a little bit. I'm imagine you and Josh were like in a bar somewhere and you're like, hey, let's start a guide company. Tell us that story.
Well, we weren't in a bar yet, but yeah, so we were definitely probably drinking a beer, I would imagine, or a cocktail on his end. But yeah, so I like I said, I worked for Naknek River Camp in Bristol Bay, Alaska. And the first season I was up there, it was kind of like, getting to know Josh, and we got along well right from the jump. Very similar in a lot of ways and very different in a lot of ways. And I think we meshed well that way. And, it's kind of like I said, it was that awkward moment where I've never wanted to step on anybody's toes, and I knew who he was, and I was familiar with, he had other companies, or outfits rather, prior to Virginia Trophy Guides. I mean, he's, other than Blaine, I mean, he's the longest standing, fly fishing guide for muskie on those two rivers that's still in operation. And so I was familiar with him growing up in the area, and just liking to fish for smallmouth and muskie and whatnot. And so I kind of had that awkward conversation with him where I was like, hey man, like we're moving out that way, and I kind of like to guide that water, after some time, and kind of dialing that program in. And he was a lot more welcoming, or, you always expect the worst when you have conversations like that. Right. And so he was like, that's when he said, screw it. We'll just guide together, just come work with me. And he was already guiding muskie and some spring bass, and then doing his Alaska season. The only thing he hadn't done in a pretty long while was the summer bass. He had kind of quit doing it in exchange for going up to Alaska. I mean, I think he's on his 10th season up there. So he hadn't guided summer bass for about 10 years, but had a, long stretch, same, couple decades worth of muskie and spring bass guiding. And so it was easy to jump in there with him. And I'm sure we, cheers to beer and a cocktail, and that was it. And, he was super good to me from the jump. He was like, look, I don't want to be anybody's boss, because this is an equal partnership, so I'm thankful for that, because he's a very selfless guy to work with. That's for sure.
Yeah, got it. And so we've got Virginia Trophy Guides, guiding muskie, guiding smallmouth. Are you doing other species, or, doing trout, or is it predominantly smallmouth and muskie?
Yeah. So he had always done smallmouth, or always done trout on a couple of the tailwaters. We kind of got away from that in the last couple of years. On occasion we'll go down there and in an emergency type scenario where, somebody's in town, they don't want to reschedule, they can't reschedule, things like that. And we will go do some tailwater trout work, but it's not something we advertise anymore. We're primarily fishing smallmouth bass and muskie on a few watersheds that are kind of in a good radius of Roanoke, Virginia, where the company is based out of.
Gotcha. So that means you're probably trout pinch is you're fishing the Jackson, and then smallmouth probably like the New River, the James, right?
Yeah. So for trout, it was the Jackson and the Smith, which again, both of which that's the nice thing about Roanoke is within, a good radius of Roanoke, there's tons of great fishing opportunities. So it really wasn't that bad to get to the Jackson or even the Smith. I mean, the Smith is a lot closer than people give it credit for. So And the Smith is a great tailwater trout fishery. And so we did some of that. And like I said, we still will. It's very rare. And then smallmouth is on the New River and on the James. We fish both, a little bit of the upper New and then primarily the lower New, or what Virginians know as the lower New, from Radford to about the West Virginia line. And then Musky, same thing, upper James, from its headwaters to, about Balcony Falls for both smallmouth and muskie. And then muskie on the New River as well.
Got it. And, as you've mentioned to folks, you've got a year-round fishery. So why don't we kind of walk through kind of what the guide season looks like? We'll just start why don't we start, end of October, beginning of November, and we'll just go all the way around the calendar, and you can kind of tell us what you're looking for or what the opportunities are for the angler.
Yeah. So this time of year, that late fall, getting into November, it's really transitional for us. And we're shifting hard from smallmouth bass fishing to musky fishing. And it's kind of your last days of smallmouth fishing. So, those bigger fish are putting the feed bag on. The minnow bite is good. Baitfish bite's good. So fishing streamers, when it's low and clear like this and cooling, I've got two extremes right now. So the James is low and clear, knee high on a duck, and the New is very off color, still from Helene because of the dam fed factors. So you've still got some green water over there. It's trending in a good direction, but it can make for good late season smallmouth fishing. Low and clear, it can be tough with rapidly cooling water. Even when they're trying to put the feed bag on, they're real spooky, really lethargic mornings. And, your best bite is lunchtime to, 3, 4 p.m., 5 p.m. And then it gets cool in the evenings and they can shut off again. So we don't do a ton of late fall smallmouth. I kind of comfortably book out, all the way through, I would say, second week of October under normal circumstances. And then if the conditions are good, we've got a good set of clients that we just reach out to, say third week, fourth week of October. We got green water and the fishing's good. Hey, if you want to get out, one of us has got Tuesday or Thursday. So that's kind of how we fill in those kind of last days of smallmouth. And then right about October 1st to like that second week of October, the temps will be good for musky fishing after, a really hot, arduous summer for them. And that's when we start doing a lot of our fall musky fishing. It's actually a great time of year for the fly rod. It's where we shine, and you're dealing with low clear water typically. That's where that kind of subtle fly entry to the water, less noise in a fly than say like gear. And when they're super spooky in the fall, which they can be, especially as you get into November and they've been targeted now for a month with these, normal temperatures or safe temperatures to fish them, they can get spooky. I mean, it's just being out, the other day, you're moving 10 to 15 fish in a day, and, you're hoping for one to eat away from the boat. And so you're maybe having 3 eats, one of them stays on, and that's, those are good expectations, because if they make it to the boat in this low clear water, they're probably going to be looking at you and you're going to be looking at them. And it's, it's just that awkward moment to watch them turn and swim off. Because we always joke, you can read a magazine at the bottom of a hole in the river when it's like this.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because even in like downtown Lynchburg, there used to be a lot of heavy industry there when I was a kid. And the water's so clear at the dam down there, it kind of blows you away.
Yeah. Yeah. So, it's nice that we don't We don't deal with that. I don't spend a lot of time down there, but I've not the first time I've heard it. It's nice that we don't deal with as much of those factors, particularly on the James anymore. And obviously the upper James has had its fair share of problems as well. But coming out of the Jackson and cow pasture watersheds. But yeah, I mean, that's par for the course this time of year is pretty much low and clear. I mean, crystal clear, tap water clear. And then as we get into, December, if you want me to keep moving on, if we get into that winter time frame, typically what you see is like October and November can be like low precipitation month, particularly October, can be low precipitation months in Appalachia. And so once you get into that November and December, that's when we start getting some of those winter, rains and sometimes snow. And, you'll start to get higher water flows and you'll get that greener water. And that's kind of like the stuff that we love in the winter. It makes some of those, you're obviously fishing bigger fly patterns. I didn't really touch on it too much, but in the fall, whether it's smallmouth, you're using small streamers, sometimes going to the bottom. And with musky, I mean, this time of year is great for people who've always wanted to try musky fishing because you do see a lot more fish. And then, we're using 7-inch flies versus 12-inch flies. It's low and clear. We're using light on flash. A lot of times we're using 10 weights with intermediates rather than 12 weights in full sinking lines. So this time of year, going back to it a little bit, can be great if you've ever wanted to try, musky fishing on the fly. And then as we get into, your December, January, February, we're not doing really any smallmouth fishing. As we get into late February, we'll start to pick it back up for sure. Especially as we've had, higher or warmer average winters in the last 5-10 years. But yeah, so we're not doing much smallmouth fishing. Musky is 100% the focus for the most part. And so when you're getting your higher average flows, your greener water, they're eating bigger forage. So that's like what people think of as your, traditional 12 weight, full sinking line, grinding it out with big flies, heavy tackle, heavy flies. And that's kind of at times what can put people off from musky fishing. And Josh, always stressed that, talking to people is like, obviously musky is not a game for somebody who just bought a fly rod. I would never, try to sell somebody a musky day that's really green, because they're not going to go out and have a good time, and they're going to struggle. And I've seen people who are on the newer end of anglers have great days and catch a fish on the first cast or what have you, but it's not something we would ever necessarily push. But I think that Josh is the best. Like if you have a good good set of fundamental in casting and line management and all these things, we can work with that. And I think people get put off from musky fishing more than they should. And there's kind of a misconception that, it's either, like big bearded dudes game, covered in tattoos or whatever. And you got to be strong to cast these lines. And I don't think that's the case or the cast these rods. I mean, I don't think that's the case whatsoever. If you have that strong set of fundamentals, I think anybody can musky fish and can be successful. But that is, your winter is when it is the most arduous for sure. 12 weights, 500 grain sinking line, 12-inch flies, sometimes 10-inch flies. And, obviously your numbers go down. You're targeting a lot of the larger fish in the system that time of year. And whereas, this week we may move 15 fish in a day, in December, January, February, we may only move 4, or 2 or 1 or sometimes none. I don't care what anybody tells you. There are days where you go out on a fly rod fishing for muskie and you don't see them. It happens. And, you're basically taking a hard game and making it harder. They're extremely sensitive lateral line feeders. And we're trying to feed them bucktail and flash and feathers. So we're at a little bit of a disadvantage when you've got those normal winter flows. And so we're kind of targeting, those slow pools, deep ledges, submerged timber, all those kind of things where, they kind of have their winter haunts. And as we kind of get into that late winter, February, early March, that's when the smallmouth rods start to come out. And we start doing a lot of early season pre-spawn guiding for smallmouth. And then we're still musky fishing and guiding typically up until about March 10th. Musky really won't spawn, on an average year until third week, fourth week of March, unless we have an exceptionally warm winter, which we have been trending towards that every year. But we mainly put the musky rods down in that early spring because the bass fishing gets hot, and that's your best time to catch, as your 20 plus inch bass, your 5 pound plus bass on a big swim fly. And that's, honestly, I think all three of us, as much as we love musky and we do love that grind, March 15th through April 20th is probably my favorite 35 days of the year, because it's just electric, and it's the biggest fish in the system eating, the best way to fish for them, in my opinion, which I do love topwater too. But I don't think there's anything quite like, watching in that green water, watching a 20 plus inch smallmouth, inhale a swim fly, a few feet below the surface, and you get to watch the whole thing. And she's the fattest she'll be all year. That's a pretty cool thing.
Yeah. And then the fight, right? Like,
oh God. Yeah.
The smallmouth fight versus the muskie fight, like there's a lot of stuff you have to do right to get a muskie to the boat. But they're not running around, and, that's just not their MO, right?
No. And actually we tell people a lot of times, I was just talking to a client earlier today. I think that pound for pound, your best fighting muskie is actually like a 3-foot muskie. Those are the ones that do cartwheels. They do go on longer runs, and you see them kick that tail and they jolt and shoot further. Whereas, the picture muskie, which, obviously everybody loves that, your 40 to 50 inch muskie. It's Josh does it best. It's like fighting a gorilla in a phone booth. It's chaotic. They're throwing their body weight around. It's a lot of head shaking, but they're not going on huge runs typically. Seasonally, they will, early fall, in the spring, post spawn, when they're jacked up and their metabolism's high. But for the most part, it's a lot of head shaking. It's a lot of opening their mouth, and it's like the rod is bent, but it's all within a certain distance of the boat, and you're still holding on, and it's a very chaotic moment, and it's very likely for them to come off. Because they have really hard mouths, and it's, we tell people, rod tip in the water and you're stripping, and then you come tight to them and strip again and strip again. Don't even worry about bending a rod. Because a lot of times you'll get them in the net, and as soon as that tension comes off that line and there's any slack, that fly just pops right out of their mouth. And it makes you wonder, whether they were just clamped or lightly hooked, or they were, or if it was hooked at all, how easy they come out. So, it is chaotic for sure, and it's fun, but I tell people muskie is more about the bite than the fight. And on the flip side, I think pound for pound, smallmouth bass are some of the, if not the best, freshwater fighting fish. It's their bulldogs, their little freight trains, and they do cool stuff, whether it's jumping, belly rolling, going in front of the boat, going on, little runs. They're not going on saltwater runs, but, I've seen some really impressive fights on a smallmouth bass, as I'm sure you have too. So they do cool stuff. And for it to be an accessible fish, I don't think there's a better fish in freshwater, especially where we are. Because, you're having higher number of days, no matter what time of the year. than you would musky fishing. And even on the worst day, you're catching bass, and that's there's something good about that. So I mean, it's yeah, I think their fight is super underrated, and I think as they grow and get some more popularity, guys like Blaine and Mike Schultz have really, and Tim at Tight Lines, like they've kind of, shown to everybody, for a long time now. It's been a lot of hard work, but that smallmouth bass really are, badass. I mean, they're cool fish, and they're kind of a perfect fly rod fish, if you ask me. They eat subsurface, they eat on the bottom, and they eat on top, all seasonally. So I think that's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, and so you were saying, right? So you kind of come out, you get to kind of like, mid to late April, right? Then you got the spawn. Why don't you take us through kind of, post spawn smallmouth all the way to topwater to kind of where we are today?
Yeah. So again, like going back to the year-round fishery, what's nice is by generally May 1st, and a lot of times a little earlier, and sometimes there's stragglers into early May, your muskie are done spawning. So while the smallmouth are on beds, we leave them alone. And what's nice about smallmouth and muskie, and most fish, is there's not like a light switch and they just all spawn at once. You're typically spawning in stages. So there, in my opinion, there's no reason to ever target smallmouth bass on beds. Something I don't do. And it's not something I would ever advocate anybody doing. And so, trout get a lot of, they get a kind of the protection from the fly fishing base, the adult fish over reds. Like, I'm a big proponent, same thing for smallmouth. And what's nice is there's different water types. You're always going to find post-spawn fish, even as early as mid-April. Some of your biggest fish spawn earlier in April. And then by mid-April, third week of April, the latest, you'll have fish that are post-spawn, smallmouth. So you can always target them in water that, isn't bed water, which it's really obvious when it is. I mean, somebody say that they didn't know that fish was on a bed. I think they'd be lying to you, because, unless the water's super green, which it can be that time of year, it certainly, I mean, often is. But there's certain water types you're targeting, and we know as guides, and most people that are out there all the time can differentiate, bed water versus seam water, feeding water, what have you. But yeah, as you're getting into that spawn, then that post-spawn muskie is great. Another time of year, we tell people, if you ever wanted to try muskie fishing, this is a good way to kind of dip your toes in, because you're not out there freezing. Your numbers typically go up, and it's another time of year where they're eating heavily, coming off that spawn, and we're fishing smaller flies. A lot of times we're fishing intermediate line. They're really chasey. They're really bitey. It's not uncommon to, just like in the fall, to go out in May and early June and move 5 to 10 to 15 fish, on a fly, and have some eats and have some to the net and whatnot. And then you're not, if you've ever thought like, well, I don't know about the cold or the 12-inch flies, that's a great time of year for people. Their metabolism's super high. They're putting on the feed bag before what they know is a long summer. And, and then once you get into that May and stuff with the bass too, a lot of them are post-spawn. There's still, depending on the year, will be some spawning. And that bite can be phenomenal as well. And a lot of times it just goes right back to that bait fish bite. We're incorporating a lot of topwater, a lot of active topwater that time of year. So if people, once you get into the summer, we're dealing with a lot more of those kind of subtle, cork bug eats and whatnot. That time of year, May and June, can be great for the people who just can't help but pop a booglebard. So like, if you have any doubts that you can come out in August or September and not pop a bug as much, May and June is kind of where you're going to shine, because those are some really good bites on the booglebug, popping them, topwater bait fish. subsurface bait fish. Sometimes, we're going to start scaling down a little bit from your 6-7 inch, smallmouth bass flies and going into that 4-5 inch. Sometimes still using the bigger flies too, but it's all about water conditions that time of year. And that time of year can be electric. If you get green water post spawn, if you got really full, rivers and it's green and everything, that can be like unreal smallmouth fishing. This spring was a good example of that, where, you post spawn, we got green water, we got plenty of water, and it's like the spawn didn't even happen. They got fat again after they spawned. They were eating, the same size flies, and it was great. Now, going back to last year, after spawn, it was low and clear immediately, not a ton of water, and things are a little tougher. Your post-spawn bite can still be good that time of year, but they can vary based on those river conditions for sure. And in that case, last year we were using a lot more finesse, a lot less flash, longer leaders, being more careful about tackle, or your leader going down a certain tippet. Whereas this spring, you could throw, 16, 20 pound bite tippet on, and you were catching a nice bass, throughout the day. So, and then, once you get into that June 10th, June 15th, we typically shut down musky. And, the common science, or the standard, I guess, is 80-degree water temps. We don't even get close to it. And what's nice too is having this year-round fishery, we don't want to push it, and there's no need to push it. So despite the fact that the bite can be great all the way up until July 4th, or some years it's been beyond, not these last few summers, I'm sure were extremely hot. But we normally shut it down right around that 75 or even less water temps. And that's just our own personal choice. I would never advocate for fishing for muskie close to that 80 degrees or beyond 80 degrees particularly, and never targeting muskie, in those dog days of summer when they're on refuge water, right off of springs or creeks or what have you. They're doing everything they can just to survive. And I think, especially as a guide service, we owe it to them to give them time, while they're dealing with those higher water temps, to where we're not targeting them. And I don't think anybody should be, but you see it happens. We try to, spread the good word, but from June all the way through the summer, there's little micro changes in the summer that we could go over. Your June going into July, you're getting off that bait fish bite where they were super heavy on that, aggressive feeding like they did. If it's green post spawn, but if you're going clear May and June and July, that's where some of those, subtle presentations, finesse presentations can be more of a factor for sure and be more productive. And then, your July is a lot of your bug fishing, and we're doing some of the, your Mr. Wiggly fishing on a 6-weight, which is a ton of fun. And July can be, great numbers. We're fishing small game changers, Helgramites, the little Helgramite changers, crawl changers. Throughout the day, you're varying your approach. And when the topwater bite's good, it's hard to get away from it. I think you would probably agree, most like anybody in the summer. If they're going to eat topwater all day, bug fishing, which is what's great about Virginia, and it's kind of what we're known for, is why would you step away from it? But there are times as a guide, and even as anglers, we have to, I'm sure you've seen it, where you go out hoping to bug them all day, and then the first few hours are not bugging, and you're not bugging until about lunch. And everybody always, you hear a lot of people talk about how that middle of the day is terrible for smallmouth fishing, right? And I disagree. I think some of the best topwater fishing I have throughout the summer is 11 a.m. on, and then obviously as you get into your evening, the topwater bite's fantastic. But you go from July into August, and that's kind of your traditional cork bug. I mean, you can obviously target them on boogle bugs too. Those work without a doubt. But in Virginia, August and September are kind of known as your cork bug time of year. And, you're hunting those shade lines, those banks. I mean, and I think people leave a lot of meat on the bones. Both rivers that I guide, some of the best topwater eats are mid-river, midday, even in August. So there's just knowing your fishery is huge that way. But I'm sure you love it as much as I do, but that August and September, cork bug bite is, that and the pre-spawn, swim fly bite, they're neck and neck for me. Obviously the fish on is fat in August or September, but a lot of times we're still hunting those bigger fish on those topwater bugs, and it's pretty epic to watch them eat it, because it shifts from a subtle eat, that kind of sucking it under toilet bowl, to, oh my God, like they crash it as you're getting into September and they're podding up. October, they're podding up. That topwater bite goes from subtle to not subtle very quickly.
Yeah, and one of the great things about, if you kind of, get out, let's say middle September until kind of the end of the topwater season, kind of, I guess, that's probably happened, I don't know, within the last week or so, is it's not so hot. It's kind of the benefit of like fishing post-spawn musky. You can get to go do the topwater thing, but you don't have to go, experience 98 degrees and, 85% humidity, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think September is an extremely underrated month to be out there. I'm sure you've seen it, where, some of our rivers are heavily trafficked from recreational, boaters, kayakers, canoers, whatnot. And then it's like, it kind of coincides with a lot of the cicada fall. When you get those cool nights, the kids go back to school and everybody's, they ran out of vacation days. And so September is nice. And I tell people that all the time, where it's like, come topwater fish with me in September. And they're always like, well, what about July and August? And, you kind of explain that you're very, you're unlikely to see anybody, that time of year in September. And that topwater bite is still good, if not sometimes better than it is in August. And things shift year to year, where the topwater bite can be better earlier or later. But September is a great time to smallmouth fish in general, whether you're talking topwater or not, because they do start to shift, gradually in September and October back to that bait fish bite. And then we'll catch them on topwater. I mean, I think Josh and I caught last topwater smallmouth in November last year. So, I mean, it's not something I would ever advocate for, but I mean, they will eat topwater, and I was talking topwater bug, like a Chuck Craft cicada, ate one in November last year. And I'm sure people have stories where they caught them in, December on them or whatnot. But I mean, it does happen. And what's nice is that time of year, you're seeing less people, trafficking the river, and the fishing is still great. And like you said, the weather is phenomenal. And going back to what you said about the muskie is, you're trading waders and big puffy jackets in December for in May, you're fishing for muskie and, at most, river pants, but probably shorts and flip flops and a sun shirt. You're basically flats fishing. The water's still cool that time of year in May, and you're fishing for muskie, and you're fishing them with much sparser, shorter flies, easier to tackle and whatnot. But same thing, these last couple summers, which you're familiar with too. These have been hot summer, particularly early on, and I had days where I tried to reschedule with people, or I would cancel if it was egregious. Where you're over 100 degrees smallmouth fishing in June and July, and to be honest with you, I don't think that's comfortable for anybody. Young folks, sure. I'll go out there and do it if somebody wants to. But, that while we have a year-round fishery, July can be really, really hot. And it's a great time to vacation. It's a great time to be on the new river, the James River. So I never want to dissuade somebody. But I try to almost push people, reading that room or whatnot, if I can tell it's a factor for them. I'll be like, hey, I know you think July topwater bugging is the best, but actually September's great, and you're going to be 10 times more comfortable. So I agree with you, wholeheartedly there. I think that's an underrated aspect of coming out and fishing that time of year.
Yeah, absolutely. And I always like to ask, outfitters too, they always have something they're kind of known for or sets them apart from, I hate to say competition, but other people that do what you do. Right. And so Austin, what do you think, Virginia Trophy Guides does that's different from other guys out on the river?
Yeah. So, I think that Josh and I, especially, with the smallmouth program, I mean, we really do pride ourselves on having a good program for targeting the big fish in the system, and, kind of carrying that torch, that Blaine kind of started in this region with targeting those fish on swim flies and game changers, and doing it the way we want to do it, but still, not sacrificing the experience for somebody, because sometimes swim flies are not easy for everybody to cast, or what have you. And so I think that we definitely pride ourselves on the pursuit of like big fish. And that's kind of what I think separates us, maybe in this region. We're hoping to take people that they want to grind it out for the biggest smallmouth in that system, that kind of swim fly tradition, down here in the mid-Atlantic. I think that's something that we pride ourselves on. And then being really approachable, guides, that was a big thing with working with Josh, is the experience and showing somebody a good time and being somebody that, a client wants to spend 8 to 12 hours a day with. So that's another thing too, is creating that experience for somebody that, from the time they book to beyond, it's easy for them. They're having a good time, despite the conditions, and enjoying their time with you on the water. And we do too. I mean, that's, we wouldn't do it if we didn't love it. So yeah, I think that, employing a lot of things that, maybe are not necessarily unique to us, but are maybe unique to this region. Some of that, Midwest tradition, some of the stuff that Schultz employs, applying it, or, pioneered and applying it down here, kind of trying to carry that torch that Blaine started down here with the game changer tradition and targeting the biggest fish in that system with those flies, triggering that predatory bite. I think that's something that I pride myself on, and tried to learn from those guys and adapt it to my own, and sharing that experience with people, because I think that that's one of those things that people book, based a lot of times on that, because they're like, man, I can't tell you how often we get that, where people are like, look, I want to, learn how to fish a game changer or swinging D or a leggy boy. Like, they're like, I'm not getting it. You know what I mean? I'm going out in mid-April, something's not clicking. They book a trip, and like, it's like a light switch sometimes, because despite the fact that you're fishing the engineering in those flies a lot of times, mixed with the tackle that matches the scenario and those flies, there is still a little bit of, not even a little bit, there is absolutely angler effort and guide effort that goes into it. And there's, we're helping you fish those flies, whether you know it or not. And then it's like, it clicks, and they end up hanging a big fish, and they're like, oh man, like, okay, I get it, and that's something that I really enjoy, is being able to share that kind of experience with clients.
Yeah, I mean, it's an amazing thing. I mean, YouTube has its place, but there's really no substitute for being on the water with people who know the fishery and kind of know the game inside out. I mean, I always tell people that are kind of new in the sport or feel kind of stuck that the best thing you can do is to go find a good teaching guide and go spend some time on the water with them.
Absolutely. I'm a firm believer, and I tell clients, they're hey, we're going down to, the Outer Banks or Virginia Beach or wherever, right? And they're like, where should I go fish? And the first thing I tell them is like, look, if finances allow, you should always book a guide. You're gonna, I mean, your time is gonna be better spent, despite the fact that there's an entry cost. Your time is going to be better spent, with a guide, because whenever you're in this, you're in the New River Valley or you're down in Virginia Beach or whatever, you may only have 8 hours to fish that entire week or 4 days or however long you are. It might as well be spent with somebody that's going to put you in the best position to succeed, right? And then also, you may learn something, or you should, in my opinion, learn something that you can take somewhere else. That's a big thing with me. I'm hoping that somebody will leave, and it may not always translate from smallmouth or musky to a redfish trip, but they can be a little bit better. And most guides that you're going to book with, or hopefully most guides you're going to book with, are going to employ that same philosophy where, there's just something that you can learn along the way throughout the trip and leave with it, and it'll stick with you forever. So yeah, I'm a big proponent of that. Is at the very least, you should find a fly shop or something, go in there and chat with them, because there's nothing, like you said, that's going to beat on the water experience. And YouTube can be great too, for sure, but the hands-on experience is hard to beat.
Yeah, and then I always say, if you've gone to all that trouble to find the best guide, please listen to them. Right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we definitely appreciate when people listen. It's like it can be the difference between, and I tell people this all the time, like, you don't want to seem like a nag, but you kind of reinforce, like, hey, I don't want to just be here to row you down the river. That's not my job. So, like, hey, slow it down, put a pause in that, whatever. And it's like, boom, there's one. And they're like, oh, it's like, sometimes you'll have those moments where people are like, they're hitting fish, and then they're like 20 minutes where they've got completely off rhythm. And then they're like, you think we should switch the fly? And I'm like, hey, let me show you something real quick. You put it back in there. You fish it the exact same way they were fishing it 30 minutes ago. And then boom, there's a fish. You hand it to them. And that's always such like a moment where it's like, yeah, you got a little off track. But that's another thing. I mean, I love when people all day, like, I think people think that it's annoying, but they're like, I love when people all day ask questions and they're engaged. If you're engaged with me and we're chatting all day, that's more often than not, that's a successful day. We're like, we're sharing in this experience. We're partners here. I'm trying to watch you succeed. And I love that. And it doesn't ever bother me. I mean, sometimes it's funny, and then, you end up asking the same things over and over again, but I would prefer that than somebody who books a trip and then, doesn't want to learn anything all day, because I'm not there to just row somebody down a river. That's not the experience with me. You know what I mean? I'm there to help you hunt the fly for specific fish, or help you grow as an angler. And I think you're right. I mean, just listen to your guide. I know that's a common trope, but yeah, listen. I don't care where you go, Louisiana, California, New York, Bahamas, listen to your guide and ask questions. They'll tell you if they want you to stop asking them, but I think you should start by asking questions.
Yeah, for sure. And so let's see, we've got, so if we want to like kind of walk through the rest of the team at Virginia Trophy Guys, it's you and Josh. And then you've got Skippy Britches, right, is the kind of the new young guy, Braden Miller.
Yeah. So Josh and I are, co-owners of Virginia Trophy Guides, and Josh, like I said, he's been a fly fishing and conventional tackle guide, and on both the New and the James River for over 2 decades. And then Braden, that's the new addition, I guess, in the last year or 2 years. He is a really talented, really funny kid, and he's not only an exceptional angler, and it at times will make you self-conscious fishing around him, but he's really turned into a phenomenal guide, and at a very young age. And he did his first season up in Alaska with Josh, and I think that was kind of a growing experience. In the last couple of years, he's mated for Jake Jordan down in North Carolina for Albies and Bull Drum. And this year, we actually went down and fished with him actually just a few days ago. He's kind of, like as Jake wants a day off or days off or whatever, Braden's running the boat. He's a full licensed captain. We all are. And, and he did it wasn't a shock to us, but he worked his ass off for the couple days we were down there. And he's, like I said, for 19, it's pretty impressive, the guy that he's turning into. He's got all the talent in the world. Humble kid, funny as can be. And yeah, Skippy Britches. I can't, what is it that, his mom calls him Precious, and Blaine likes to call him Precious too. We all like to call him Precious. I love that that's out on the airwaves.
Yeah. So if you see him at a show, and then you can also
call him Precious.
And you'll also, if you talk to him at a fly fishing show, he doesn't like to sell his flies. So
no, and that's another thing too. He is an exceptionally talented fly tyer, and I think that part of it too is, he doesn't get enough credit for. It was like we joke he was born in a fly fishing booth, and it was, in a lot of ways he's been there and present in that part of the industry since he was 12. You've known him longer than I have, he's a talented tyer, and I think he's just like, he spent so long doing it. I have seen it now where he works shows with us, where he's trying to talk about his fishing program. And it's like, he's almost trying to make tying take a slight back seat because people are like, hey, how do I do this? How do I do this? And he's like, I want to talk to you about smallmouth fishing or musky fishing or albie fishing, So yeah, he won't sell you any flies. He won't even sell me flies. So good luck.
You need to talk to his mom. She'll get it set for you.
she'll get him straight.
So that's your team. And, you touched on this a little bit, and we talked about this in the pre-interview talk, but you've kind of brushed up against it while we've been talking this evening. I'm a little bit older than Blaine, but we're about the same age. So we kind of have a similar perspective kind of on what the fisheries were like, when we were younger in Central Virginia, and Blaine certainly more so than me, because, I didn't have access to a boat as a kid. So, but I know, you've been in the game long enough to see the changes. We've got a great program, kind of in, the mid-Atlantic, but people also know it's a great program. And so we've seen a pretty radical increase in fishing pressure. And we've certainly seen impacts on fishing populations. I think, knock on wood, we've had probably in the last 5 or 6 years, pretty good smallmouth spawns, but the fisheries are certainly not what they were, say, in the 80s or the 90s. And I was kind of curious, your thoughts on what you think we need to do so that current and future generations can continue to enjoy the resource. And probably an add-on question there is another piece of this puzzle is we're seeing more and more tech creep in to fishing. And, that's kind of code for live scoping and things like that. So why don't you let folks know what you think about all that stuff?
Yeah. So, as far as that question goes, I can speak to my own experience kind of only here where, when I was younger, when I was a kid, teenager, fishing with my grandfather, it was not uncommon on the New River to have these banner days, right? And I grew up fishing with gear, so there's an asterisk a little bit, or in the fly fishing world, there's considered an asterisk. But, where you would see, you could see 10, 15, 20 citation fish days, smallmouth in March and April, where you're catching citations, left and right, back to back, and not even moving tons of river miles. And, talking to Josh and Blaine, sometimes it does make me sick to hear about, the salad day, like when they were guiding in the early 2000s, and you have, 10 musky days and, all these things, which, they can still happen. Don't get me wrong. The fish are still there. In fact, the musky populations, according to our, to our state agencies are in better density, better shape than they've ever been. But, those days where there was the lack of pressure, when I was younger, I mean, we would go to a boat ramp, on the New River or whatever, and you wouldn't see anybody else. And that was a Saturday or a Sunday. You may see one other guy, you know what I mean? So, obviously the pressure's increased. The way that, and I think that it's a mixture of pressure, and then it's exactly what you said. So the number one enemy to successful, smallmouth populations in Appalachia, but let's just say, the two rivers I guide specifically is the fact that when they spawn and right post spawn is our laying season, in Appalachia, temperate rainforest, people forget. And so the blowouts hurt those fish, hurt the numbers. Traditionally speaking, it can. There are obviously years where it's really bad for a couple of years. And then, like you said, the last 4 or 5 years have been fantastic spawn classes. We've had, minimal high water events during their spawning, and those classes have gone out off with a bang. And it makes you look forward and happy for what's to come in the next 8 years, 10 years, when, you've got a really healthy population of 18 to 22 inch bass, things like that, which right now, particularly on the new, where I do 90% of, my smallmouth guiding, or almost all of it, I would say, we've got a really healthy population of 18 to 22 inch bass. But to counter that, we've also got more pressure than we ever had. And I don't think a lot of people realize this either, but the New River, I can't remember what the publication was, but it was like a bigger, kind of outdoor publication. But it was the New River it was considered in the top 10, best smallmouth bass fisheries in the country, and it was the only one in the top 10 that was a river. So it's known for having large smallies and having a large or high density of smallies, and particularly large smallies. It's got all the trappings of a great smallmouth river, habitat, flow, things like that. Food. I mean, it's a food factory. I mean, it's, I'm sure you've seen it too, but I mean, crawdads that their tails at your wrist and their claws are beyond your middle finger. Lobsters. And, hellgrammites galore, stone rollers, suckers, chubs, whatever. But the pressure is higher than it ever has been. And a lot of that is, social media, YouTube, post-COVID, and that stuff happens. And I think, the big thing, and Josh and I preach this, that it's our job to navigate the increasing pressure and do the best we can despite it. So while it can be frustrating, and really the only thing that's frustrating to me about it, because it is a free country, is that the only frustrating thing I see is that as the pressure increases, I would like to see, safe handling practices really preached and employed. You see people, I see it all the time, where people, they deck load muskies into jet boats. They put smallmouth bass on their kayak to measure them in July at 1 p.m. and it's just cooking one side of them. And, like those kind of things I would like to see, particularly our state agencies, really drive home. I'm less interested in seeing them post what fisheries are great. And I mean, you can tell the BDGIF I said this, but what fisheries are great. And I don't have a problem with that. But on the flip side, what I would like to see them do is, take a step in the right direction for safe fish handling practices. And that's a big thing, wetting your bump board, minimizing your handling period. If you catch a big muskie, having a big net, or catch a muskie, or if you're muskie fishing, having a big net and, needle nose pliers and wire cutters and all the things that I think are just as important as the right tackle to take care of them. And if you get a nice one, take it to the bank, take care of it. And what I'm also sick of seeing is a vertical hold on muskie. It's terrible for them. Supporting them, and one, it makes for a better picture too. With you hold them by the tail, you support their belly, and guess what? When you hold their belly, the mouth drops open and it gives them that classic, iconic, musky look, where their mouth is open and you see all those teeth. And so, I mean, there's certain things, and I could catch grief for it, and that's fine. I don't care. I'm willing to go to bat for it. But certain things with the increasing pressure, like I said, it's a free country. I'm all about people enjoying our resources as Americans, but I would like to see everybody take a step in the right direction. State agencies, outfitters, guides, what have you, pushing safe handling practices as more and more people get on the water. And that's something that all three of us, and I mean, we stressed this to Braden, Josh stressed it to me, and something that I already, was passionate about. But whenever we were handling these fish with clients, we walk them step by step, in case they go smallmouth fishing or musky fishing anywhere, or, on the same watersheds. And I want to see them take care of those fish. And so I show them, look, here's when you would need to use jaw spreaders. Here's when, you need these needle nose pliers. Look, you need a big net, and here's why. With the bass, it's the same thing. You don't want to cook them on the side of my drift boat, on the rod trays. You want to wet your bump board. You want to minimize the handling. You want to not jaw jack them. We're out there fishing for them, and at a certain point too, we are poking them in the face with steel, but you want to do everything you can, unless you're harvesting them, to take care of them and ensure that they're there for the next time or somebody else, So that's, that navigating the pressure is tough for sure. But it's the way we look at it is that it's not going to change, and it is my job. And Josh would tell me, there's no excuse for it. And we would tell Braden the same thing, tough luck. I mean, there's people out there now. It is what it is. Nobody's got the river to themselves, and that's fine. I enjoy watching people enjoy the resource. But, as far as the electronics go, like what I would say about that is I've got, for certain things, like we don't guide any lakes, for live scope and sonar, all those things are they can be absolutely necessary on a lake system. And I don't have a ton of lake fishing or guiding experience, but they can be necessary on the rivers we're on. And it'll crack me up. Like I'll be at a boat ramp and you see these jet boats and they're like, "Hey man, we scoped 6 musky right here," and they're like telling you and you're like, "Dude, they go to that same spot every year in May." It's like that's where they go. Like you're sitting in an eddy that it's hard. It's like you said, it's hard to beat on the time or on the water hands-on river knowledge, because as a guide, I need to know that seasonally where these fish go and why, and then what are spots that I should be taking your fish, and what are spots that maybe at this time of day we should push through and whatnot. I don't think electronics are necessary in a river system. Sure. I mean, if people want to employ them, whatever. I think they can be to the detriment of a fishery. I think a lot of that is yet to be seen, what's going to happen. But yeah, I don't think you need them, is what I will say. The long and the short of it is, musky and smallmouth seasonally go to the same places every year. And then you grew up on these rivers too. I mean, it's all wedge and rock dependent, current dependent. And so, with a little bit of experience, where they are or where they should be.
Yeah, I think the challenge with particularly the big muskie is that, there are not a lot of them and it takes a long time to grow them, right? And, the thing to think about, put aside wherever you want to come out on, like put your time in and really earn the fish versus go out and, hit them with the live scope and then go pound on them. But, one way to think about it, I mean, folks do whatever you want to do, right? But what I would say is, if you think about it from the standpoint of fair chase, and if everybody on the river live scopes a 54-inch muskie and pounds the snot out of it, it's going to change that fish's behavior and it's going to fundamentally alter the fishery.
Absolutely. And I think that there are certain ways with live scope that you can, like I said, they go to the same places every year, but if you can pinpoint radar, 3 muskie sitting in an eddy and you're just pestering them until they eat. I think it's to be determined what the detriment of that is going to be. And here's what I will say to add to the safe handling is that, and I talk to Josh and Blaine about this a lot because, I mean, they have a lot more experience than I do guiding or fishing for them, in general. So I talked to them kind of about the idea that, I mean, you think about it, even with safe handling, you catch a 4-foot muskie, so many times in a season, or few people catch it throughout the season. There's a good likelihood that even with safe handling, that fish may not make it through the 4th, 5th hooking or fight of that season. And that's something that, you're talking about the morality of fishing, I guess there. But, I think that, you add, what I mean to say is that you add live scoping on top of that. And, it's like you said, there are less adult muskie and smallmouth in a system than there are juveniles. And right now, both of these fisheries are in a really healthy, spot with 28 to 38 inch muskie. And there's always going to be less adults, but I think that, with increased pressure, we have seen maybe that there are even less adults now. And then also, they're a little more wary. And it goes back to, I was talking about sometimes it would makes me sick listening to Josh and Blaine talk about, 8, they in one day, figure 8, 6, 7, 8 muskie in one day. And, you start to see them. I'm sure you've seen this too, fishing with Blaine. They're getting more and more wary of boats. And so while they will eat in the figure 8, it happens, every, all the time, but, and they will go into the rotations at the very least. They're getting more and more boat wary. And that's a fact. I don't care what anybody says. And I think there's even more importance on hunting your fry away from the boat now and not being lazy and being on top of it. And that's where I'm on you. I'm on you all the way, muskie fishing. I'm standing. The guy in the front of the boat, I'm on your shoulder, watching. If you mess up in the figure 8 and you hit the boat, or, you're making noise, you're shuffling your feet, I'm on you, just like, look, man, I know I keep telling you, but it can be the difference maker between a fish. And I can't tell you how many times I've seen that, and I think that is a result of increased pressure where somebody hits the rod or hits the boat with the rod. And that's not a natural noise. They're in the figure 8 and they're in that Cheshire cat mode where all they want to do is kill that thing. And they're on the 5th rotation. All of a sudden, Joe hits the boat, with the rod, and it comes out of that, trance, and it shoots off. I mean, there's only one thing that made it do that, and it was that rod. And so, I think they're becoming more and more aware, and not to say that fish wouldn't have done that anyways, but, that's where, you got to be sharp, is with the increased pressure. It's my job to be on you more. Hey, you're moving that fly too fast. Hey, you're not pausing enough. Hey, you're popping that bug when you're not supposed to. I want to see you succeed. And so despite the pressure, maybe I can't be as hands off as I could have been, say, if I was a guide in Virginia 20 years ago. So.
Well, and as it just helps me reiterate what I said earlier, which is listen to your guide.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. And so, Austin, before I let you go this evening, is there anything else you want to share with our listeners?
Yeah, obviously I'm appreciative for you having me on, and we invite anybody, all levels of skill, to come fish with us and really see, I'm very lucky to work on 2 really great fisheries for both smallmouth bass and muskie. But an added benefit to those fisheries is that while the fishing is good, the sights are incredible. And yeah, we may have scared you a little bit about a hot July day or a really cold December day, but it's nothing that we can't fix, with a jacket or, fishing, fishing earlier or rescheduling, but it's hard to beat. And I know you can speak to this too. The views that we have in Western and Southwest Virginia. I wouldn't rather be anywhere else. And then, could work in Alaska still. And, I choose to be here during the summer. And we would welcome anybody to come fish with us and see what fishing for muskie and smallmouth bass in Western Virginia is all about.
Yeah, it's funny you say that because I think the heat and the cold just makes the beer and the whiskey taste better.
Ooh, yeah. I was going to say coffee, but I like whiskey and bourbon better.
See, there you go. And the bourbon is the Virginia thing. And so, Austin, if folks want to learn more about Virginia Trophy Guides or book a day or follow you guys, on the water, where should they go?
Yeah. So, I mean, you can go to our website, virginiatrophyguides.com. We're on Instagram and Facebook, the exact same name as well. Or you can reach out to us and call us. Emails are great, but I think sometimes, people tend to have a lot of questions. And, Josh and I mean, you could probably tell from this chat here that I'm not shy. You can call me at 11 p.m. and chat with, hey, when should I come fishing? And that's something that we stress, right? Is when people call us, figure out what you want to fish for and what you want to achieve. And then we can help you hand pick days. And I think that makes for the best experience. So, give us a shout. I mean, call us, email us. You can reach out to us on DMs on the social media and yeah, you can reach us at any time. We're an open book.
Well, there you go. Well, Austin, I really appreciate you taking some time out of your evening to chat with me.
Yeah, thank you, Marvin. Hopefully be able to get you out and do some bass fishing, some musky fishing, and some bourbon drinking.
Yeah, or we can do summer and fish when it's hot and drink gin and tonics.
Yeah. Looking forward to seeing you this winter too. So,
absolutely. Take care.
Yeah, take care, Marvin.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the interview as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Don't forget to check out Trout Routes Pro at maps.troutroutes.com. Use ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, to get 20% off of your membership. Tight lines, everybody.